いや、チンポン、じゃあ説明していきます。
Let me explain.
チンポンは6人グループです。
We are a group of 6 people.
で、今日説明するのは、スクラップ&ビルドプロジェクトというものを。
So I'm going to present, we are going to present scrap and build project. Scrap and build project. Scrap and build.
Yeah.
Scrap and build.
Scrap and build is like dismantling the existing structure and then build a new thing. This is a methodology of Japanese architecture since, like 8 of period.
なんでこのプロジェクトをやり始めたかというと、来年、東京オリンピックがあります。
So the reason why we did this project is that Tokyo Olympics are held in next year, 2020.
とても街が変わり始めている。
The city of Tokyo is changing.
で、この舞台は新宿という一番の歓楽街。
So we took a stage, we found a stage in Shinjuku, the most entertaining place, like Times Square complex.
その前の東京オリンピックでできたビルがちょうど建て壊しになるので、そのビルを丸ごと1個を使ってやったことです。
So in 1964 there was another Tokyo Olympics, and then a building which was created for at that time was being destroyed, dismantled. So we used that building.
このビルは歌舞伎町振興組合ので、その振興組合、歌舞伎町振興組合が戦後に行政指導所なんか初めて自分たちで作った。
Okay, so this building is a very interesting historical function. It was a building for the promotional union of Kabukicho. Kabukicho is the name of this area, like Times Square, much more vulgar than like the dirty party. And then in order to the first kind of union that was established by people, people around there, not made by the government.
で、その振興組合のビルがまた新しいオリンピックのタイミングで建て壊しになると聞いたので、僕らがビルを使わせてもらって展示することになりました。
So we heard that the building made in 64 was being scrapped and built again on the occasion of another Tokyo Olympics. So we asked them to let us use this for our project.
それでこの新宿歌舞伎町のつながり、僕らのつながりとして、普段から遊んでいる場所っていうのもあるんですけど、そのメンバーの女の子のエリちゃんの旦那さんっていうのがこの一帯のホストクラブの元ナンバーワンで、今はいろんなホストクラブとか経営しているものすごい
街の若手の
リーダー。
So our relationship to this area, Kabukicho, is of course we hang around in this neighborhood, but more than that, our member Ellie, a female member Ellie, her husband used to be a host meaning host club. He entertained female clients, and then there are lots of this kind of host clubs, and he was the number one host in the and then now he's a very young leader of the managing and owning the many host clubs. So that's our relationship to this area.
はい。じゃあ一個ずつ何となくやってみます。これが4階です。
This is the fourth floor of this building.
これは その事務所、振興組合の事務所のだった場所。
This was the office of the promotion union.
青いのは、本当にブループリントの要領でブルーにしていて、
So自分たちで塗ったの？
塗ったっていうか写真のブループリントと同じ。
So you can see there blue. We colored it with the method of blueprinting, like architecture.
なんで、ロッカーがあったりするところは写真の要領で光でやってる。
So where you can see white, like they are lockers. So they are like when you illuminate it, then it didn't get the blue.
で、そういう記録を残すみたいなものと、
It's one way of making a record.
でもう今使ってないんですけど、当時は建物を建てる時も建築の印刷方法がブループリントだった。
And also it difference the old days method of making architecture blueprints. Do we not use blueprint now?
No, they use digital copy. It's digital.
Okay.
All digital now. The old-fashioned blueprints.
で、そのせいで失われているもう技術でもあって。
So in a way, it's a lost technology.
ちょうど今だからインクがもうなくなってる。去年これをやるその前の日に大手がなくなったので、もう自分たちでかき集めて。
So one day before this project execution, the major company folded or closed, stopped selling the blueprint, the die. So we have to run around to get enough amount of blueprint die.
時間ないがブルーあれでしょうか、ビルバーガーこれ穴が開いています。
You can see the hole we cut.
これ自分たちでこうやって
So
開
you
けてます。
can see we are cutting this.
そして一番下の階に積み重ねています。
So you cut every floor, so you can see the layers of the cut floor there.
タイトルはビルバーガー。
So it's called Bill Burger, hamburger kind of buildings.
だから間に挟まっているのがその場所にあったものとかその階のイメージしたものを例えば一番上は事務所とか事務所その時は事務所とかでその次の下は麻雀雀荘だったでその時のものとかで次の下はまたホストとして事務所としてで一番下は
So you can see the objects, on each floor. It's referencing the what it was. So fourth floor was the office of the promotion union, and then the third floor, the second from the top, was the mahjong house. I don't have to explain mahjong in this crowd, right? And then the next one was the office for the host club, and then the very first floor was ramen bar. So you can see some ramen.
街をテーマにしていたので、新宿を作るこの振興組合の人たちが戦後に何をしたか、街は人が作るものだっていうことで、街は人なりっていうタイトルで街づくりをした街でもある。
So our project thematized the city. When the union people started their gathering and then create the Shinjuku, this area, their motto was the city is people. People is the city. So we wanted to work on that thing.
イベントをたくさんやりました。
So we did lots of events. So they are host.
ポストオリジナル乾杯。
So their style of a kampai, like preparing the food.
はい、はいです。
It's very expensive.
で、この展覧会をやった後に何をしたかっていうと、これイベントで、
So you can show the footage from the events.
で、展覧会が終わった後に、ビルが建て壊す時がやってくるんですけど、作品をそのまま置きっぱなしにしました。
So after the exhibition, the moment of dismantling this building came. So we decided to just leave our works as is there.
だから、作品も一緒に壊れ。
So our works were also destroyed along with the building. So this is the way they dismantle the building. Also, like you can see the blue wall.
でこれが、スクラップ&ビルドプロジェクトの、スクラップ部分で、僕ら自分たちの、スタジオスペースがあるんですけど、そこで、ビルド編の展示を計画しました。
So this is the scrap part of scrap and build project. So build part is taking place in our studio space.
そのスタジオスペースっていうのは、本当に戦後すぐ建てられたようなバラック。
So that's our studio, or where our studio is located. You can see it's like a barrack, the very makeshift kind of structure created immediately after the war.
まださっきのビルと同じ時代では。
So the time-wise, it's around the same time period than the building with they destroyed.
ここに
So now it's building. これも建設中？
今展示を作っています。
So you saw they were making ceilings before.
こういう感じの場所。元々はこういう場所。
So originally it looked like this.
ファッションのレディー・ガガがやってきたりするような新進系のファッションデザイナーとかが入ってたりする、それで若い人たちと一緒に運営してました。
So this is a very young generation place, like very cutting edge fashion studios, like the whose patrons may be Lady Gaga, and then it's like that before we came in.
そこに、道を作りました。
So what we did is we created a passageway, street.
で、その時にさっきの歌舞伎町の、壊した痕跡だけじゃなくて、東京の、スクラップ&ビルドの歴史も同時に表現したいなと思って、他のところのからももらってきて一緒にこの道を作ると決めました。
So what we did here is the building. They did the scrap work, so they got some parts of that, and then also we want to absorb the history of Tokyo scrap and build buildings. So we also request to get some of those scrap materials from other buildings, and we kind of layered those materials in the underground part.
その一つが、渋谷にあるパルコというものすごい大きい商業ビルです。
So among those buildings, one is the Parco building in Shibuya fashion the department store.
でそこもオリンピックのタイミングで大きく建てられている。
So Parco building also was being remade for on the occasion of Tokyo Olympics, being made bigger and newer.
なぜ道を作ろうとしたかというと、まず僕らが、いつも街に出て作品を作ることが多かったネズミを撮ったりとか。
So why do we wanted to create a street? Because we often the time go onto the streets like catching rats and so on so forth. So we often make our work on the street.
だからもうスタジオの中にも道を作ってしまえ。
So why not making a street in our own studio?
もう一個オリンピックの開催で街がきれいになることによって道が不便になっているというか、ホームレスが気軽に寝れなくなっていたりとか。
So the another thing is because of the Olympics, the city is being beautified. That means it became very inconvenient to use the streets. For example, homeless people cannot, easily find their sleeping place.
それでその都市が変わって大きいビルが建てるときに一応その下に公共の場を作るっていうルールがあってでそれは一応公共でみんなに開かれた場所を作る代わりにすごい高い建物を建てているっていうことをすると法律はあるんですけどでも実際はそこはそういうホームレスの人たちが見にくかったりとか夜は閉め出したりみたいなその本当に開かれた場所ではない。
それが増えてしまう。綺麗だけどどんどん
いろんな人のために開かれた空間ではない。
So what we mean by restricted or inconvenient to use? Let us explain. When the new buildings are made now, there is a law that allows to make it higher, instead making the bottom part, the ground part, accessible to the public, just like in New York. However, open to the public means kind of problematic because they may close during the night or they may chase out the homeless people. So in a way, it's not really accessible to the public.
僕らのスタジオの道は24時間開けていて誰でも通れるし。
So our street is open 24 hours, 7 days.
7 days.
7 days. Just checking. Yeah, just checking, and then anybody can come in.
ホームレスがもし寝に来てしまったら今度僕らが試される。
So suppose a homeless man comes to sleep, then we feel we are being tested as the public, like a public entity.
タバコも吸えるようにしてます。
So smoking is okay here too.
お酒も。
Drinking is okay too.
そういう歴史をあれするためにこれは道の表面という断層。
This is the basement view. So we layer all the debris from scrap buildings, and then you can see a kind of history here. So we cut the manhole hole on the first floor so that you can get into the access to the basement part. So that's our female member Ellie going down to the
マイマンホール。
no manhole.
いや、どうする？時間的にまだ大丈夫ですか？
How is time?
You have 15 minutes.
15分までですね。
あ、まだ。
うん、大丈夫。
あ、じゃあそれで言ったら、ただ道を作るっていうのはとても大変で、アスファルトを引いたら道になるわけではない。
So you have to realize, understand, it's not easy to make a street. If you lay asphalt, that doesn't make it a street.
同じものを例えば砂漠に作ったとしても、それとここは違うだろうし。
So if we make the same thing in a desert, it will be very different from what we have here.
僕らは道を作るということは道を育てるということだった。
So for us, to make a street means to nurture a street.
なんかそれはこのプロジェクトは建築家の周防さん
博士の
周防さん、
先生のいた人もすごいこのプロジェクトの計画に一緒に活動していて、なんかその建築家独自の都市的な目線も入ったことによって、よりこういう面白い形になっている。
We have to give a credit to Mr. Suo, who used to work at the SANA, Sejima's office. So he brought in as an architect very urban type gates. So we benefited from collaborating with them to make this type of very interesting space.
それによってより道を作るだけじゃなくて道を育てることがより重要だということを一緒に考えている。
So we together thought about this motto to make street is to nurture grow a street. So we developed this idea together.
あとさっき新宿を作るときに人が大事だっていう話があったんだけど、道もそうだ。
So before I mentioned that when Shinjuku was created, those people thought the people is important. Well, here too, our street people are important.
だからオープンした後はブロックパーティーとかをいっぱいしたい。
So after we opened the street, we have many block parties.
新しいヒップホップみたいな音楽生まれるかもしれないし。
So maybe a new kind of hip hop music can emerge from here.
デモをするところでデモして政治が変わるかもしれないし。
So if we have a demonstration here, politics may change.
道にはとても可能性があった。
So a street has many possibilities.
なので、はい、あそれは台湾、台中のミュージアム、国立ナショナルミュージアムです。
So it's a street that we made at the museum there in Taichu, in Taiwan.
高円寺の道を作ったということから台湾のビジネス館のオファーが来た時に道のこのプロジェクトを提案しました。
So because of our experience of creating the street, when we get the offer to show at this national museum in Taichu, we proposed to Taichung. So we proposed to make a street.
台湾で、2017年にサンフラワームーブメントがあって、とても若者たちがデモ行進とか道をちゃんと使っていろいろ政治を変えたりっていうふうに。
So we understand that there was a safflower movement in Taiwan. The young people demonstrated and used the streets very effectively in the activism.
でサンフラワームーブメントの面白いのは、今、国会を1週間ぐらい占拠した。
So the interesting thing about the safflower movement is they occupied the Diet building for a week, perhaps the same as the Hong Kong now.
なんかこう中と外とかパブリックとプライベートとかそういうことを
So we wanted to think about the issue of inside and outside as well as the public and private.
だから、今回この作った道は行動とつなげていきます。
So this street we made in Taichung is connects the public street and then the museum.
で、中まで。
And then the street enters into the foyer of the museum.
で、まあ、外の道もこの美術館も同じパブリックなんですけど、ものすごいルールが違います。
The interesting thing is the outside public streets and then the inside the museum streets, our streets, they are governed by different rules.
なので、この道の上はまあ、僕らの作品でもあるので、それで
新しいレギュレーションを作る必要がある。
So this street is our work. So we have to make a new set of regulations.
なので、
本日ご来場の皆様、お座りいただき誠にありがとうございます。私はチンポムのエリーです。
So we can say that we explore the third public way of thinking, third public, together with the museum.
チンポムはこれまで街に出て、さまざま
その交渉の中で、道の上でパーティーをやったり、相撲をやったりとか、お酒を飲んだりみたいな。
全部決めていった。タバコはどうかが、お酒はいいか。
So as we negotiated with the museum, we decided on what to do. Can we do parties? Can we smoke? Can we drink? And then so on and so forth.
まあこれは道を育てなきゃいけないからこれはブロックパーティーをするんだけど、台北の立法院から台中まで来てもらった道が続いているから。
Okay, so yeah.
バスあれじゃないブロックパーティーを。
So in order to nurture and grow our street, we had the block party, but we invited people from the Taipei. Taipei's what's that? The Congress, legislature. Yeah, legislature. So they organize a bus tour for people to come to the block party.
それでサンフラワームーブメントも一緒にやった人が
そうそうだから、サンフラワームーブメントに参加してた人たちの若い人たちと一緒にパーティーをしたりしてます。
So our block party in collaboration with people who are involved in the sunflower movement.
これ全部決めて、スモークは OK だけど、タバコはダメだけどスモークは OK とか全部交渉したり。
So according to the negotiated regulations, you may not smoke, but you can make smoke.
グラフィティは OK かどうかとか。
Graffiti was okay.
全部。
So everything is spelled out.
アルコールはダメだけどソフトドリンクは OK とかそういう。
So alcoholic drink is no, but soft drink is okay. So you could drink something.
あと。
So those are the scooters okay. That's a vehicle to enter the
例えば商売が OK。
So is it okay to sell something?
イベントの時は OK。
So during the event you can sell something.
あと面白かったのは、 ホームレスを想定して、寝るのは OK かとか決めたときに、横になるのは OK だけど寝るのはダメっていうルールができたんでした。
So we have to think about how we face with the homeless people. So the lying down is okay, but sleeping is not okay. So they are doing the discussion, negotiation.
デモをやってくれた人たち。
So some people participated by doing the demonstration.
イベントの時だけお酒は OK ですね。ナショナルミュージアムとか。
So usually alcoholic drinks no good within the National Museum, but during the event time we said okay.
だから、ただ、ただ飲んでるように見えるけど、とても意味のある一杯だ。
So we didn't just drink. There's certain meanings attached to it, so you can read the English part of it. Oh,
そうですね。はい。
Perfect.
Thank
Thank you very
you.
When Jane and Hillary asked me to whether I can take part in this and whether I can say something about Hong Kong art and what's happening in Hong Kong at this moment in time, I did hesitate and I had to really think about it because what's happening in Hong Kong, I'm here, and what's happening in Hong Kong, I'm not there. And how much, and although I was there on this one particular day, I had left there afterwards. So it really kind of raised the question for me, who gets to speak for Hong Kong and Hong Kong art at this moment in time, because as someone who's on the outside, and perhaps we can return to that question later. The other thing that I really want to talk about in this particular section is not necessarily about the artwork specifically, but actually look at what's happening right now, what kind of thing is actually going on the ground, because I do think what is happening with this particular march, or this series of march and this particular set of protests, is actually something very different from what we had seen before with umbrella movement, which is the one that everyone makes comparisons with. And I think this change is significant, and I think this change is also significant, and it will have bearing on how we think about Hong Kong art and in particular Hong Kong identity, because I think the conversation has changed. And we're in that moment, or I'm in this moment of thinking about how we can think about this, and perhaps we can have that conversation as well. So I don't, who's forwarding the images, is it? Can you do it for me? Thank you. Okay, so just a bit of background in case you haven't been following what's been going on in Hong Kong, just very quickly. Before the march on the 9th, I mean, there were other things that were happening, and I think one of the most important things that happened, which doesn't get enough coverage, I think, in international press, was actually the first march itself was actually a protest by lawyers. And I think that's going to be very important. It was a silent protest, and it was an impromptu, massive protest by lawyers. And if you think about it, lawyers were the ones who actually initiated the very first of these big protests. It's actually a very telling thing. And we're going to come back, and I think the importance of law is going to be something that's going to be very important to how we are rethinking Hong Kong identity as well. On the back of this, there was also this, which was about, not censorship in this way. So this particular cartoonist, he's Australian Chinese. Well, he's based in Australia, he's Chinese, and he Winnie the Pooh, by the way, which is his thing. Xi Jinping presidency has actually now been banned in China, which I think is kind of like banning Winnie the Pooh in China. So that's kind of what's happened at this moment in time. But his show was cancelled. And I think another thing that's actually underpinning all of this is actually censorship as well. And the fear of censorship. And that's going to be another thing that I think will come in as well as we go through the conversation.
And just so you know, Winnie the Pooh was banned because people were saying he looked like Xi Jinping.
Yes. So you can't.
So when you can't refer to Winnie the Pooh because maybe you might be referring to Xi Jinping.
So you can't use it. You can't use the image. You can't talk Winnie the Pooh. You can't say Winnie the Pooh is seen as a political dissent at this moment in time in China. So you can't even buy Winnie the Pooh anything at this moment in time. It's sort of, it is ridiculous, but that's kind of what we're at this moment in time. So going back a little bit, and where I think the changes in art is, and how we're thinking about the space, and the space of where art is happening. So this is actually what was happening during the umbrella movement, and as all of you know, this is the reason for, this is sort of the starting point for the umbrella movement. This one guy who actually held up the umbrella to, because it was raining over the place, and it was this gesture of reaching out that then became the symbol of this particular movement itself, and hence gave rise to this particular sculpture, which I'm sure many of you know, which is made by Milk and an anonymous artist himself. So next, please. And connected to these, I apologize, by the way, for the quality of the images. I'm not very good at taking pictures. These are all my pictures I've taken. So next to this is the Lenin Wall. And I'm sure, as you guys know, it goes back to the Lenin Wall in Prague, but it became very important in Hong Kong. And it actually wrapped all around in Admiralty, where this is. And as you can see, it's the sticky notes. People writing the points and putting it up. And if we can take the next slide. These are some of the things that we had that will actually be covering this particular wall itself. Can I have the next? But if we were to actually go back even more and the importance of the performance and why I think there's been a shift in how we are thinking about Hong Kong identity, is that it's the 80s, the post-80s generation. And there have been a lot more performance art, and one of them, this is actually one of the key ones that were happening, Star Ferry Clock, and a lot of that had to do with heritage and urban spaces, of claiming space. And these performances were very spontaneous, they were often done by younger generation, and their concerns are very different from the previous generation of artists who were looking in post-handover Hong Kong art. A lot of those were talking about Hong Kong identity and the idea of a third space, the idea of negotiating and the anxiety of negotiating between what is our Hong Kong identity vis-a-vis England, vis-a-vis China. And a lot of that was addressing that Hong Kong belongs into the so-called third space. And as I'm sure many of you know, that comes from that very post-colonial discourse from Ibaba, etc., etc. But what's happening here at this moment in time is something very different. And I think this will grow and become something much more different. In that these participants, these post-80s generation, but also artists today, they're not really thinking about identity in that way. They're thinking about identity not necessarily as an ambiguity of who they are. We are simply Hong Kong. There is not any ambiguity to where we stand vis-a-vis these other spaces. So it's no longer relational in the same way. So because all identity is relational, and the relationship prior was actually very much vis-a-vis a different nation. And so as a way of thinking of their own national identity, or their nation identity, not a nation per se. What is actually happening now, I think, is not necessarily rethinking Hong Kong identity, is that we simply are. And because we simply are, we're actually looking at the structures that form that particular what is Hong Kong, and they're looking at rules, they're looking at law, they're looking at the structures that is actually framing what is Hong Kong, and that's what they're challenging. So it is a very different kind of relationship, and that, I think, has had a lot of impact in the kind of art and performance, in how performance art or activist art and different types of art forms are responding to Hong Kong identity. It's a very different type of landscape that we're seeing as well. So, perhaps the next one. The Lenin Wall comes back again. So this has come back in Admiralty, and then if we can carry on to the next one. What I find very interesting, and one of the things that I think is very different between what is happening and the nature of the protests with this one and the umbrella movement, is that one of the key things that was the umbrella movement was very much structured along the similar lines to Occupy, in that it was about claiming the streets, claiming the space, and so they actually occupied central area and spread out. That was one of the key things what they were doing. One of the key terms that's actually being used for this set of protests at this moment in time, and I think this is fundamental point, is that it's like water. So they're actually not having this idea of claiming a specific fixed spot, but it's this idea of the fluidity of protest that will always move forward, that will move in different ways. And as a result of this idea of claiming the street as a thoroughfare, as a spot that you can go through, as opposed to a spot that you sit on and claim. The structure of how these things have is fundamentally different as well. And I think this idea of the cleanliness streets and this whole movement is that which is always about fluidity and movement, has also had a big impact in how the Lenin Wall has also spread. And this is also one of the other point that I think is very key and different in this movement from the previous one, is that one of these, we see these Lenin Walls in many different parts of Hong Kong. This is in Kwun Tong, that is in Tsim Sha Tsui, that's Kowloon Bay. No, that's Kowloon Bay. I can't remember what that one is. And for any of you who know Hong Kong, these are areas that are often industrial subplaces. They are often full of, apart from TST, but most of the other spaces where we're getting some of these Lenin Walls appearing, they're appearing overnight, and people are actually protecting them. They're now covering them with plastic so people can't remove the actual stickers as well. And in fact, there's one spot in Tai Bo, which is a tunnel. It's now spread all the way inside the tunnel. It's not just one spot, it's now become a whole passageway. These areas are all very much working class spaces. And I think one of the crucial differences that's happening with this particular protest march is how much it's actually speaking to those who cannot leave Hong Kong. These are people without passports. These are people who cannot move. And the extradition law in particular is something that it resonates with them in a way that the democracy movement in many ways didn't so much. That was just too abstract in many ways. It was also caught up with the idea of the privileged class. This is something which is far more on the ground, and one of the key things is it's also shifted the conversation in many ways. So one of the ways in which the conversation has changed, and it's in the moments of changing. So I don't know whether I'm speaking ahead of time or whether this is just me from afar thinking this is what's going on. So I say this with a pinch of salt, or at least I'm thinking about this and let's just throw that out as a thought. There is a big difference with how they're thinking of the idea of public versus community. And public here is not necessarily, they see public as that which is still nonetheless not about community, right? Public is still a structure that is top down. It's still regulated by laws and regulations that come top down. Community in its own way is actually something which is much more grassroots. So that actually, in the past, the idea of Occupy was about let's take over public spaces, as if there is this idea of public space as a free space. What is happening here now is that they don't trust this idea of free space, of the public as being free space. They've known that not to be true, because Umbrella have proven to them that's not true. So they've actually been far more driven by ideas of community. And that idea of community is actually something which has to do, so the way that they're forming relationship is much more different. So it's much more about creating smaller groups, it's about little friendships. You know, one of the things about WhatsApp, a lot of this information is being channeled is it's like, what you do, where you going? You know, it's very informal structure of communication that then happens while, there isn't like a billboard you go to and you say, this is what's gonna happen, which is kind of what happened with the Umbrella movement. With this time around, it's a far more informal circulation of movement. And maybe that is the biggest flow in itself. In that it is the internet that is actually the biggest thoroughfare. That is perhaps where the fluidity is coming in, which also makes sense because the predominant group of people behind all of this are students, right? Are all the younger generation for whom the social media platform is the most obvious way of communication. But that in itself, again, I think has shifted the center of how we think about that relationship between what is community and what is public as well. So perhaps we can move on to, but I want to emphasize this is not just a movement which is by young kids. I mean, a lot of these are also by a much older generation. And again, it goes back to that ultimate thing. It is really hitting those who do not have the ability to move, who don't have, you know, the double passports, they don't have the ability to simply get up and move. It is something that's hitting the generation or generations of other people who are the working class, and I think that's a big part of what this movement means to them. And I think there's a lot of response to them. What I find really interesting about all of this is that this is not performance art piece of any kind, but it is performative. in that they are taking on these idea of let's do these almost like flash mob performances that's happening, which has nothing to do with artist groups, which has nothing to do, there's simply community who've decided to do this, and the visibility of this and using that visibility and creating these images that they know at the one hand is very Instagrammable and can actually move people, but also it's a good way of communicating to others as well. And then last but not least, and this was a student action that took place where they decided to dress up as prisoners and then they chain themselves. And they did this. And again, it was to some degree, this was a very impromptu thing. There was nothing about this that was actively planned far, far ahead. So I think that's the last one that I have. Oh, and last but not least, these are, this is, I don't know whether you guys recall this. This was when she had cried.
Carrie Lam, the chief executive.
Carrie Lam, the chief executive. She was, when the students started protesting, she was crying, but everyone said these are fake crocodile tears, and she's got the crocodile arm over there. So this one became a meme that actually then circulated. And again, this was another one of those things in terms of what are the kind of art forms that we see actually happening at this moment in time. So other than the fact that a lot of the people on the streets are taking on performances itself as part of their protest, we also see a lot of these circulating around. The internet has been a very, and the circulation of digital images been a very strong one. And last but not least, taken back to the tag man and using that with the umbrella movement as a big part of what it is. So this is kind of where Hong Kong is at this moment in time. But I think it raises, so let me just recap on what I think are some of the questions that it raises, and then perhaps we can talk about this. Is one, I think that shift between what is grassroots and redefining what is grassroots at this moment in time, and the power of the grassroots. I think the other thing is this idea of space, and the idea of the street, claiming the street, but claiming the streets in a very different way. And I was very interested in how you were talking about the cultivation and nurturing the street, how you were actually trying to make a street come into being. Whereas what these people are doing in many ways are thinking of the street as not necessarily as simply a thing to move through, and not necessarily, and in doing so, they create a street, I suppose. But it's not nurturing the street. It's nurturing the street in a very different way. But the street as a place that actually have, in many ways, in Hong Kong at least, a place where there is still a freedom to express, whereas buildings itself, it's when they enter into buildings, as in when they're trashing Lechko, that becomes an aggressive act. But the streets itself, to some degree, still have some sort of freedom and flexibility. And I'm wondering how you see that in your work as well. So I'm interested in that. You worked with institutions as well, right? You worked with and you were negotiating the relationship with your work and institutions. And one of the things that is happening in Hong Kong, especially with the arts that came with the umbrella movement artworks, is what do you do with these artworks afterwards? Who gets to see these? Do we need to keep these artworks? What is that relationship between activist arts and institutions? Who gets to talk for them? So I'm wondering what you think about the afterlife of your work. Once you perform your work, what do you think about how it does afterlife when it gets placed into institutions? So maybe we can start with those two as conversations to start.
Okay, can we start with the street?
Yeah, we can start with the street, yeah.
で、一応ストリートで、一応こう、まあ、香港の場合、動くっていうのがあるけど、それでもですね、ビルディングはなんか潰してしまうかもしれないけども、ストリートはフリーダムスペースだっていうのはね、ただ、アクティブとしているとか、スライドとかっていう感じはちょっと、まあ、それをそういうふうにしてしまうので、どういうふうにこう、Do you want the reaction to Hong Kong or
about your own project with streets?
なのでなくていいので、自分の近くに考えてやっていただ
日本も、原発 爆発したっていう。
So in Japan too, after the explosion of the nuclear power plants, there are many street demonstrations.
やっぱ道はやっぱ何日間もしたりとか、やっぱ道でもちろん道で行われていて。
So naturally they are happening on the streets over many days sometimes.
なんか
different way. Why do you think the street is so important for you to think about as part of your project? Because the street, you know, you built streets, you were determined that people could wander on the street. There was a certain freedom that comes with streets. What is it for you that is so important about the street?
So let me just backtrack on what they said about their impression of the Hong Kong demonstration is in Japan, the post-Fukushima demonstration feels much more controlled.
But there were a lot of protests.
But much more controlled than how it was happening. It is happening now in Hong Kong, so that's their impression. So Japan is more controlled. But even at the time. But yeah. Anyway, so and then we can move on to the street question. And then so our group, not all of us graduated from art school. So the process is we always talk, discuss, and then see what we can do together. And then often the time we intuitively decide what we want to do.
Right.
So it's like we form a small society already.
Right.
そこでスクラップ版のビルドというか、そういう大きな国家的なオリンピックみたいなのが他のシチュエーションでもジェントリフィケーションとか行われるときに結局なんだろうジェントリフィケーションとかも本当はより良い状態になるっていうことですね。小さいものをよりまとめて、思想的にはより良いものをどんどん作っていくっていう上がっていくような意識。でもそれを続けている結果がこの結構やっぱりそのいろんな人たちを制限するような状況になったりするので、まずそのジェントリフィケーションとかスクラップ&ビルドっていうサイクルをどうやって僕らがちょっとイメージを変えることができるかっていう時に何かを立てるというよりは、僕らがもともと表現してたそっちじゃ僕らがもともと身体的に持ってた道で表現するっていうことをやっぱり一番大事にしたいなと思って、道ってさっきの高円寺のスペースもそうなんですけど、実際は壊してるんですよね。その場を壊して道を作ってるんですけど、道をビルドしてるので。
Alright, so like a scrap and build, that happens when the national project like Tokyo Olympics happens, or like the trend of gentrification happens. Philosophically speaking or theoretically speaking, both supposed to improve a better situation, better condition. However, after many cycles of this gentrification of scrap and build, it actually restricts us, not improving but restricting. So what we thought about in order to how to change the idea or image of the scrap and build, cycle of scrap and build. That's when the idea of street came in. So rather than creating something, and artists always do, but what we wanted to express or follow is what we internalize through our body walking on the street. And then, so that's why street. And in a way, making a street meaning actually destroying something. And but also you are building it too.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it. Yeah.
I think because it's very hot here, right? We're gonna end.
We're going to end this section. We're going to go outside, and then everybody's invited outside, and we can continue the conversation outside. Does that make sense?
There'll be food and drinks.
Anyway, because it's obviously an extremely interesting comparison, as well as each one has a very interesting and thoughtful ideas behind what they're doing. So thank you very much, Yeewan. Thank you very much, Lyon.